I should have turned back the moment I saw the water shifting like it was alive, but greed and curiosity pushed me deeper into the Mariana Trench. Down there, where sunlight has never touched, we follow 11 rules that decide whether we come back breathing or vanish forever. I remember the first time I broke one. The silence wasn't empty anymore, and something started moving in it. These rules aren't traditions or superstitions. They're survival warnings carved from the bones of those who didn't listen. I never imagined I'd become one of them, until the day I saw what waits in the dark. When I first signed on to the expedition as a treasure hunter in the Mariana Trench, I thought the warnings were just ways to scare rookies into discipline. The captain looked me in the eyes that night before our descent and told me calmly, "This isn't like diving anywhere else on Earth." I laughed at that, brushing it off, because how different could it be? I had been diving since I was 16, charting wrecks and salvaging forgotten steel. But when he gave me the printed list of survival laws, the first one was underlined twice. Rule 1: never dive alone, no matter how safe it seems. I carried those words in the back of my mind as our submersible drifted downward, metal groaning under the pressure of the ocean above us. The trench is not a place that forgives arrogance, yet arrogance was the only thing keeping me steady. My partner Reed sat across from me, running checks on the oxygen mix. He whispered about the things people claim to see here: lights that weren't fish, voices on the sonar that didn't belong to our crew. I told him it was nonsense, though I felt a quiet knot tightening in my chest. You don't descend nearly 7 miles into the earth and expect normal rules of nature to still apply. By the time we reached our first dive point, my hands were trembling, though I tried to hide it. The plan was simple. Reed and I would exit together, tethered by a thin steel line that connected back to the sub. It was supposed to be routine, nothing worth remembering. But as the hatch opened and the black water poured in, my instincts screamed against me. There is no horizon here, no light to anchor your sense of direction, only void. I stepped out into the abyss, my body shrinking against the immensity pressing from every side. Reed's suit light glowed beside me, the only thing convincing me I wasn't drifting into an infinite grave. Minutes into the dive, something caught my eye, a faint shimmer in the water, almost like a trail of dust drifting in a current. At first I thought it was harmless, maybe sediment kicked up from a nearby slope, but then I realized the trench floor was still far below us. The shimmer wasn't rising, it was following. I tried to wave Reed over, but he was inspecting a jagged edge of rock that jutted upward like broken teeth. My panic felt childish in that moment, and I told myself I was just imagining things. Still, my hand clenched tighter around the steel tether. The deeper we moved, the more wrong it felt. Time behaved strangely here. I checked my wrist gauge and found that what felt like 5 minutes was closer to 20. The shimmer remained, always at the edge of my vision. I wanted to call Reed back, to suggest returning to the sub, but pride swallowed the words. And then it happened. Reed unclipped his tether. I spun toward him, eyes wide behind my visor, and tried to signal that he was breaking the first rule. His hands moved confidently as he drifted further away, his suit lights cutting through the black like twin moons. My stomach turned cold. It didn't matter how experienced we thought we were. He was alone now. I wanted to shout, to order him back, but my voice only echoed in my helmet, swallowed by water too heavy for sound to escape. The shimmer behind me shifted suddenly, streaking toward Reed like a shadow stretching across the abyss. His lights flickered once, twice, then disappeared as if swallowed whole. My hands tightened on the tether, heart racing, and I yanked hard, but nothing came back. No vibration, no pull, just the eerie weightless slack of a rope leading to nothing. For what felt like an hour, I stood frozen in the water, unable to move, staring into the void that had taken him. My chest burned with every shallow breath, and I thought about what the captain had told me. These rules aren't for discipline, they're for survival. I had just witnessed what it meant to ignore the first. I gripped the tether and began pulling myself back toward the sub, every inch of my body screaming with the sensation of being watched. Behind me, in the crushing black, I swore I could hear Reed's voice calling faintly, but not through comms, from the water itself. When I finally slammed the emergency hatch shut behind me, my body collapsed in the sub's airlock. My lungs heaved, but it wasn't relief that filled me. It was horror. Reed was gone, erased as if he had never been beside me at all. His log data had cut off at the exact moment he unhooked himself, leaving only corrupted files, no traces, no proof. I sat there in silence, replaying it over and over, and realized I hadn't just lost a partner. I had watched the abyss claim him, and the most terrifying part was knowing it hadn't finished with me. That was the night I stopped laughing at the rules. That was the night I finally understood the weight of the first law. I didn't sleep that night after Reed vanished. The crew tried to console me, but there was nothing anyone could say. A man had been erased in front of me. Not lost, not drowned, just taken. And even though I'd escaped back into the sub, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me inside. That's when the captain approached, his face grave, and reminded me of the next line on the survival sheet. Rule 2, never answer a voice that comes from the water. At first, I thought it was symbolic, some kind of poetic warning about madness and hallucinations. Down here, cut off from the world, even silence feels alive. The pressure warps not only metal, but also the mind. Yet by the second night, I realized the rule was literal. It was long after lights out, when only the hum of the reactor kept us company, that I heard it, faint tapping against the hull, like fingers brushing steel. Then through the static of the comm system, a whisper slipped into my ears. Reed's voice. He said my name. Just once, clear as though he were floating right outside the sub. Waiting. I froze, my hand hovering over the receiver. There was no possible way it could be him. His oxygen tank had hours at best, and it had been nearly a day since he disappeared. But hearing his voice made my chest ache, because a part of me wanted so badly to believe he had survived. The words of the rule flashed through my mind like a knife. Never answer. Never. I clenched my fists and stayed silent. Minutes stretched into eternity. The whisper grew louder, not frantic but patient, like a fisherman coaxing a fish into the net. Open the hatch, it said finally. Still in Reed's tone. The others stirred in their bunks, though none of them reacted, as if the voice was meant only for me. My mouth went dry. If I spoke back, even one word, I knew I would be breaking something fragile, a barrier holding whatever existed in the trench at bay. I curled into my bunk and pressed my hands over my ears, but the voice threaded through, calm and insistent. The following day, I confessed to the captain what I had heard. His face didn't change, as though he'd been expecting it. He told me, it's never them. Whatever you hear, whoever you hear, it isn't them. That sent a chill into my spine, because he didn't ask me to clarify. He didn't need to. Every one of us had heard the voices at some point. I wondered then how many crewmen before me had answered, and what became of them. On the third night, it wasn't Reed's voice anymore. This time it was my sister Emily, someone who had never set foot near the sea. Her voice was soft, trembling, calling for help, like she was drowning outside the hull. My heart raced as I sat upright in my bunk, staring at the walls as though they might break open. I wanted to scream back, to tell her it wasn't real, but the rule gripped me like chains. The voices knew what strings to pull, what names to borrow. They weren't random, they were tailored. I asked one of the engineers, Novak, if he'd ever answered the voices. His silence was louder than any reply. He avoided my gaze, fiddling with a wrench, and finally muttered, I listened once, just once. He wouldn't say what happened, but I saw the scars on his forearms, long and deep, like something had clawed him from the inside of his suit. He whispered that, when you answer, you don't just hear them, you invite them in. That night, I locked my cabin door, though it offered no real protection against what swam outside. The next dive tested me more than anything before. We were retrieving samples near a ridge, when the comms crackled again. It's me, the voice said. "Reed, I found a tunnel down here, and I need you to follow." My stomach turned ice. The voice sounded different this time, fuller, as though it wasn't just mimicking sound, but emotion too. It was angry. When I didn't respond, it began to scream, deafening static mixed with words that no human throat could make. My visor fogged from my ragged breathing as I gripped the tether with shaking hands. That was when I realized the true danger of the voices. They weren't trying to trick you with kindness. Not really. They wanted reaction. Any acknowledgement at all, because the moment you respond, even with silence broken by a sob, they know you're listening. And once they know you're listening, they don't stop. I held my ground, refusing to answer, but one of the newer divers, a kid named Harris, wasn't as strong. His voice came through comms, soft, trembling. "Reed, is that you?" The silence that followed was worse than the screaming. Harris's line went slack, his light winked out, and the sonar registered his vitals dropping to 0 in seconds. We never recovered his body. The trench had claimed another. Back inside the sub, no one spoke of it. No one needed to. We'd all seen what happened when the rule was broken. I sat alone in my cabin, every nerve frayed raw, listening to the faint sound of tapping against the hull. They still wanted me, whispering promises in familiar tones, but now I knew better. The silence I gave them wasn't strength, it was survival. And yet, every night, when the whispers slither into my dreams, I wonder how long I can resist. How long before grief or guilt cracks me open? Because deep down, a terrible thought gnaws at me. What if just once, it really is someone I love, waiting in the dark? Still, no matter how much it hurts, no matter how real it sounds, I will remember the second law written on that cursed sheet. The voices still haunted me long after Harris vanished. I didn't tell anyone, but every time I closed my eyes, I could hear them clawing at the edges of my thoughts, begging to be acknowledged. The captain kept reminding me that the rules were our only anchor, and I clung to them like scripture. But nothing could prepare me for the night. The lights went out. That was the next warning burned into the sheet we carried. Rule 3. If the floodlights go out, do not move. It started with a low hum, not mechanical, not quite natural either. The kind of sound that makes the fillings in your teeth buzz, like the trench itself was vibrating. Then the floodlights that bathed the sub in pale safety flickered, dimmed, and snapped into darkness. Every diver knows light is life down here. Without it, the sea is not just dark. It's suffocating, crushing, endless. And in that instant, I felt eyes on me, thousands of them, watching from the abyss. The instinct to run was overwhelming. My body screamed at me to move, to check the systems, to grab a flashlight, but the rule whispered in the back of my skull, "Don't move, not a muscle. Don't even breathe louder than necessary." I forced myself still, sitting in my cabin with hands pressed into the mattress, listening to the silence grow thick and heavy. Somewhere beyond the hull, something shifted, dragging itself against metal like a predator testing the cage. Minutes stretched like hours. The temperature dropped so sharply that my breath turned into fog in front of my lips. My mind conjured images I didn't want. Shapes pressing against the glass, teeth scraping steel, hands clawing their way inside. I tried to think logically, maybe a system failure, maybe an energy surge, but no explanation could account for the deep, rhythmic tapping that began echoing against the sub's walls. Slow, deliberate, like something circling us. I wasn't the only one awake. Through the thin metal bulkhead, I heard one of the younger crew whisper, "What's happening?" His voice was shaky, barely a breath. I wanted to shout at him to be quiet, but before I could, the tapping stopped. Silence. And then, with a suddenness that made my heart stop, came a knock directly above us. 3 sharp raps, like knuckles on a door. I bit my lip so hard it bled. Every part of me wanted to crawl under the bunk, to scream, to run down the hall for the captain. But the rule was iron in my mind. Don't move. The boy who whispered didn't listen. I heard the creak of his bunk, the shuffle of bare feet against steel flooring. Just that small movement was enough. The knock above us turned into scraping, faster, harder, until sparks rained through the tiny seams in the ceiling. The crew froze, but the boy had already taken another step. I didn't see what happened. I only heard the sound, like a wet sack collapsing, then silence again. His bed was empty the next morning. The captain didn't even ask where he went. None of us did. When the floodlights flickered back to life, nothing looked different, yet everything felt changed. The walls sweated with condensation, and faint streaks ran along the glass viewport, as though something had dragged its claws across it before retreating. I lay in my bunk shaking. The rule burned deeper into me than ever. Still, part of me wanted to know, why not move? What did the light protect us from, and what did the dark invite in? A week later, I found out. We were stationed near a trench canyon, collecting geological samples. The floodlights reached maybe 100 meters into the gloom before fading into black. I was at the viewport when I saw it. A shape tall as a building, just outside the light's edge. Not swimming, not floating, standing. Its limbs were too long, bent at angles that hurt to look at. Its head tilted, not curious, but aware. Watching. The lights flickered again. My stomach lurched. If they went out now, we'd be sitting ducks. I pressed my back against the wall, every nerve screaming, as the hum returned, rattling the bolts. And then, darkness. The last thing I saw before the light died was the creature taking a single step forward. I didn't move. Not a breath, not a blink. Around me, I heard whimpers from the crew, the shuffle of someone shifting in panic, and hiss cut through the air, like water seeping in through cracks. Then silence. One by one, I felt the air grow heavier, as though invisible hands pressed against my chest. I prayed the others would stay still. Most did, but one man coughed, just a sharp reflexive sound. The hiss turned into a roar. The sub shook violently, alarms blaring as though we were under pressure attack, though no hull breach showed. I felt the vibration run through my bones, a deafening scream inside my skull, and then, just as suddenly, it stopped. When the lights returned, the man who coughed was gone, not torn apart, not drowned. Only his bunk remained, sheets still warm. Since then I've learned to treat darkness as sacred. The lights are not just bulbs and wires, they are boundaries. When they die, something else comes alive, and it hunts movement. It doesn't need to see, it feels the air shift, the steel creak under your weight, the heartbeat quicken as you panic. To move is to announce yourself. To move is to die. So now, when the floodlights falter, I freeze, every muscle locked until they blaze back on. Even if it takes hours. Even if I feel breath hot against my neck in the dark. Because I know the truth etched in the third law of survival down here in the trench. The silence after the floodlight incident never really left us. We kept working, kept running checks, but every single crew member carried the same haunted look, as if they were waiting for the lights to fail again. Days blurred together into cold, sleepless stretches, the ocean groaning around us like it was alive. And then came the night we learned the next law carved into survival. Rule 4, never answer a knock on the hull. It was 3 days after we lost the man who coughed. Sleep had become rare, every sound magnified into a possible threat. I was sitting in my bunk, staring at the riveted ceiling, when it came 3 sharp knocks, not echoing through the sub like before, not distant. This was right on the outer hull, inches from where I lay. The sound was too perfect, too human. Not the groan of steel or the shifting of currents, but knuckles. Someone was out there, in the pitch-black deep, knocking like they wanted to be let in. My first thought was insanity. No diver could be outside at that depth. Even with the best suit, the pressure would pulp them instantly. Yet the knock came again, slower this time, deliberate. I held my breath and pressed my palms over my ears, but the vibration carried through the metal into my bones. For a moment I thought of answering back, just one tap, to prove to myself it was an echo, some trick of acoustics, but I remembered the rule. I wasn't the only one who heard. Down the narrow corridor, another crewman hissed, "Who's on exterior duty?" His voice was trembling. Someone muttered back, "Nobody. We sealed hours ago." That was when the knocking spread. One side of the hull, then another, then directly below, like dozens of hands pressing, feeling, testing our prison of steel. Each knock grew heavier, more insistent. The captain appeared in the passageway, face pale but steady. He raised one finger to his lips. Silence. He didn't need to say the rule out loud. We all knew it, but rules have a way of unraveling when terror sets in. One of the junior techs, a man named Boyd, couldn't stand it. He crawled down to the viewport, pressing his face against the glass, whispering, "There's someone out there, has to be." The rest of us stayed frozen, hearts pounding, listening to him breathe fog against the glass. Then his tone changed, almost soft, almost relieved. "It's Harris." The name dropped into the room like a bomb. Harris, the first we lost to the voices. Boyd was staring into the void, insisting he could see him, waving, mouthing words. My blood turned cold. Harris had been gone for weeks, swallowed by the trench. No body, no hope of recovery. But Boyd's voice cracked with desperate joy. "He's alive. He's right there." I wanted to drag him away, but I couldn't move. I remembered the scraping above the bunks, the vanishings, the suffocating sense that the abyss didn't just take, it imitated. Before any of us could stop him, Boyd rapped his knuckles against the glass. Just once, a single sharp answer. The response was immediate. Every knock around the sub fell silent. The pressure in the cabin shifted, a low groan humming through the steel, like a predator inhaling. And then something slammed against the viewport so hard the glass spiderwebbed. I'll never forget what I saw pressed against that cracking barrier. It wasn't Harris. The face was close enough to make out, but wrong in all the ways that matter. The proportions were there, the eyes, the mouth, but stretched, warped, too wide, too sharp. Its smile was a fracture splitting from ear to ear, rows of teeth jagged as broken glass, and it kept knocking its forehead against the weakening glass, like it was laughing. Boyd screamed, but it was too late. The floodgate was open. The thing's arm shot through a seam in the hull that hadn't existed a second before. The hand was pale, webbed, claws dragging sparks across the metal. It grabbed Boyd before any of us could move, yanking him forward with impossible strength. He vanished through the viewport that should have been solid, as though the sea itself swallowed him whole. The hull sealed behind him, unbroken, as if nothing had ever happened. We sat in dead silence, listening to the echo of his scream fade into the abyss. No water leaked, no crack remained, only the after-image burned in our minds. The thing that wore Harris's face like a mask, smiling as it dragged Boyd away. That was the last time anyone questioned the rule. After that, every knock, every scrape, every sound from the endless dark was ignored. Sometimes the knocking lasts for hours, following us as we drift deeper. Sometimes it's frantic, begging, voices calling our names in patterns too perfect to be coincidence. Once I swear I heard my mother's voice, tapping and whispering outside the hull, but I don't answer. None of us do, because the trench isn't empty. It remembers who it takes, and it sends them back, twisted, hollow, wearing our faces. And every knock is an invitation, a lure, a promise, a trap. All it takes is one answer to let them in. So I've carved it into my mind, into my skin if I have to. Down here, when the abyss comes knocking, there is only one truth that matters. Never answer a knock on the hull. The trench had always been alive with darkness, an endless black that swallowed even the strongest floodlights. But after Boyd was taken, the dark became heavier, as though it wasn't just an absence of light, but a living thing pressing against our hull. For 2 nights we floated in that silence, afraid to sleep, afraid to breathe too loud. On the 3rd, something new appeared. A glow in the abyss, drifting just outside our viewport. That's when we remembered Rule 5, never follow a light in the trench. At first, the glow was faint, like a lantern lost at sea. It bobbed slowly in the currents, pale blue and almost gentle, as if it wanted to be found. We crowded near the glass, whispering among ourselves. Some thought it was bioluminescence, a deep-sea creature we'd never catalogued. Others swore it was mechanical, maybe a lost drone, maybe even a distress beacon from another vessel swallowed by the trench. Whatever it was, it pulsed softly, the rhythm hypnotic, almost like a heartbeat. One of the engineers muttered, "That could be a way out. A signal." His eyes glittered with the kind of desperation we all carried. The thought clawed through my own mind too. What if it was a lifeline? What if someone was out there, alive, waiting for us to follow? Hope was dangerous, but the abyss knew that. It played on it. The captain barked for everyone to step back from the viewport. His voice cracked with something more than authority. It was fear. Don't watch it. Don't follow it. But not everyone obeyed. A junior navigator, Collins, lingered at the glass. His breath fogged the pain as he whispered, "It's calling us." I didn't see him move, not at first. 1 second he was pressed to the viewport, and the next, the hatch to the docking bay was hissing open. The alarm screamed, metal grinding as the airlock cycled. We rushed after him, but by the time we reached the chamber, he was already gone. Suit half-zipped, helmet barely sealed, stepping into black water like a man possessed. We watched on the monitors as his figure drifted away from the sub, pulled toward that distant light. At first he kicked, swimming awkwardly, as though under his own control. Then the light pulsed again, brighter, sharper, and Collins stopped kicking altogether. His body went slack, arms dangling, legs still, yet he continued gliding forward as if carried by invisible hands. Someone shouted into the comm, begging him to respond. Only static answered. The glow brightened, splitting into smaller sparks, circling around him like fireflies. For a heartbeat, I let myself believe he was being guided to safety, that maybe the trench wasn't all teeth and hunger. But then the sparks merged again into a single searing glow, and Collins vanished inside it. Not swallowed in the sense of being hidden by the dark, but erased, dissolved into the light itself. The screen went black. No trace, no body, nothing. The docking bay hatch wouldn't close after that. It hissed and jammed, as though something invisible was holding it open. We worked frantically, forcing it shut, terrified the glow would seep inside. When it finally sealed, the air in the sub felt poisoned with dread. No one spoke. We sat in the humming silence, waiting for the light to return. And it did. Hours later, when most of us pretended to sleep, it appeared again outside the viewport. This time, it wasn't a single glow. There were dozens, hundreds, tiny pulsing lights, drifting upward from the trench, spiraling around us like a swarm of deep-sea stars. They moved in patterns, too deliberate to be natural, weaving, circling, forming shapes. For a moment, they looked like faces, faces we knew. Boyd, Harris, Collins, smiling, beckoning, their eyes empty but glowing. One crewman broke. He screamed their names, banging on the viewport as though sheer force could drag them back. The captain pinned him to the floor, hand pressed over his mouth, whispering through gritted teeth, "It isn't them. It's never them." The swarm of lights didn't fade for hours. They circled, waiting, teasing, dancing like bait. Some swore they heard voices in the static of the comms, soft and pleading, urging us to open the hatch, to come out, to follow. By the time the lights finally sank back into the trench, the sub smelled like sweat and fear, and none of us had the strength to stand. After that night, we stopped looking out the viewport. We covered it with anything we could find. Tarps, fabric, even scraps of clothing. Better to drift blind than to see the abyss staring back. Still, sometimes I catch the glow bleeding through the cracks, washing the room in pale blue. It waits for us, patient, endless. I don't know what those lights really are. Maybe they're living lures, creatures older than the ocean itself. Maybe there's something worse, the souls of the taken, twisted into bait by a hunger we'll never understand. But I know this, every time someone follows, they don't come back. They don't even die the way we understand death. They vanish, as though rewritten into something the trench owns. And if you let yourself believe the light is salvation, if you take even one step toward it, you'll never step back. The trench knows your hope, your weakness, your hunger to survive. It shapes itself into whatever you need most, and then it takes you. That's why we carved it deep into memory. The rule none of us dare break: never follow a light in the trench. The night after our encounter with the drowned girl left everyone shaken. The trench grew quieter, though not in a way that felt safe. It was the kind of silence that hummed beneath your skin, as though something was waiting just out of reach. I spent hours trying to convince myself that we were still in control, that the rules would hold if we obeyed them. But deep inside I knew something had shifted. The captain gave no orders the next morning. He only handed me a fresh oxygen tank and told me to stay sharp. I remembered his words when I saw the glow flickering in the distance, and that's when I recalled Rule 6: never follow a light that appears where no diver should be. At first the glow looked harmless, just a soft blue pulse seeping through the abyss like a lantern guiding lost sailors. My mind betrayed me with hope, whispering that maybe it was another team, or even equipment lost from a previous expedition. But hope is poison down here. The trench has ways of painting illusions so vivid you want to believe them. I hovered in place, the water pressing in on all sides, until one of the crew swam beside me. "You see that, right?" he muttered through the comms. His voice cracked with disbelief. That glow was moving, drifting deeper, almost as if it wanted us to follow. I shook my head violently, signaling him back, but already I could see the hunger in his eyes. Humans aren't made to resist the call of light in the dark. It's stitched into our instincts. He was already adjusting his course when I grabbed his arm and pulled. The water fought me, pushing me toward the glow as if the trench itself wanted to drag us closer. My heart pounded, and I knew this was no random phenomenon. Nothing natural moved with such rhythm, swaying like a heartbeat, pulsing with intention. If he went after it, I would lose him. If I followed to save him, I would break the rule myself. The glow slowed as though it sensed our hesitation. For a moment it dimmed completely, and I thought it might vanish, but then it returned brighter than before. Shapes began forming around it, faint silhouettes that suggested divers just at the edge of visibility. Helmets gleamed, bodies turned, and one of them raised a hand as if waving to us. My companion shouted through the comms, "It's people, they're trapped." His voice carried that frantic desperation only the trench could create. I gritted my teeth and wanted to scream at him, but all that came was a choking whisper, "No one else is down here." The wave of fear that rolled over me was almost paralyzing. I could see their masks, the faint reflection of glass, but their movements were wrong, too smooth, too fluid, like marionettes dancing at the bottom of the world. My grip on his arm weakened as I realized I was staring directly into what the rules had warned me of. The trench had made divers out of shadows, convincing enough to tempt even the most disciplined among us. And in that moment, my companion tore free. He kicked toward the glow with a burst of determination I couldn't counter, leaving me clutching at nothing but water. I chased, not to follow the light, but to stop him. Each kick sent knives of exhaustion into my legs, the suit groaning as the pressure reminded me how deep we were. The glow shifted as he swam closer, morphing into a corridor of brightness, like an underwater tunnel carved just for him. I screamed his name over the comms, but he didn't slow down. Instead, his voice came back to me, calm, almost dreamlike. "They're calling me. Don't you see? They need me." His words weren't his anymore. They were too smooth, too rehearsed, echoing in ways they shouldn't inside my headset. By the time I caught up, he was reaching into the light. His hand disappeared first, swallowed by the glow as though the water itself parted for him. I grabbed his shoulder, yanking with all the strength I had left. For one agonizing second, I saw his faceplate turn toward mine, eyes wide with something between terror and awe. Then the glow consumed him entirely, and my hand closed on empty water. He was gone. No body, no sound, just a faint ripple that tickled my suit before vanishing into silence. I froze, gasping against the regulator, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The glow dimmed again, shrinking to a single point of light before winking out. I was left alone in the vast, crushing blackness. Every part of me screamed to bolt for the surface, to abandon everything. But the rules aren't suggestions. They are the only thing keeping us from joining the bones that litter the trench. I forced my limbs to move, each kick a struggle against panic as I made my way back toward the vessel. When I finally reached the entry hatch, the others were waiting. Their helmets reflected my shaking hands, and I knew my face betrayed everything I had seen. One of them asked, "Where's Jiro?" I couldn't answer. The words sat heavy in my throat, useless against the truth. The captain didn't ask again. He only placed a hand on my shoulder and squeezed hard enough to hurt. He knew. We all knew. The trench had claimed another one of us, and it had done so with a cruel trick designed to lure us willingly into its jaws. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay in the metal bunk, staring at the ceiling as the vessel creaked with the weight of the ocean above us. Every sound became suspect, every shadow a reminder. I thought of the glow, of the false divers, who waved like friends returning from a long journey, and I shivered with the memory of Jiro's calm, dreamlike voice. The trench didn't just kill him, it used him to tempt the rest of us. That was the part I couldn't shake. The knowledge that next time, the glow might carry his face, his voice, his gestures, and I would have to resist all over again. And as the vessel groaned in the night, I swore I heard faint laughter in the static of my headset, laughter that sounded too much like Jiro's own. Jiro's disappearance haunted every breath we took inside the trench. The crew grew quieter. Even the captain stopped giving speeches before dives. Nobody wanted to acknowledge it aloud. But each of us knew the ocean hadn't just claimed him. It had used him. That thought left us raw and brittle, like one crack in the hull might shatter everything. I told myself I would be ready for whatever came next. But readiness means nothing in a place where the impossible is routine. And when I saw the figure hovering in the dark, waiting just outside the beams of my lamp, I remembered Rule 7. Never look directly into the eyes of what looks like a diver. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks again. The trench had already shown us glowing false divers. Why wouldn't it use the shape of a real one? The silhouette drifted just beyond reach, its movements deliberate but not aggressive. It tilted its head, watching me though I couldn't see its face clearly. My pulse thundered in my ears, the helmet amplifying every breath. My instincts screamed to make eye contact, to confirm whether it was Jiro, or perhaps one of the countless others lost down here. But the rule pressed harder in my skull. Don't look into its eyes. The figure floated closer, enough that the outline sharpened. It wore a suit nearly identical to ours, though its edges looked wrong, too smooth in some places, too jagged in others, like a memory badly stitched together. Its arms hung limp, until slowly one hand raised and curled in a beckoning gesture. My body wanted to obey, to swim forward and close the gap, but every fiber of discipline I had left kept me anchored. I forced myself to stare at its chest, its limbs, anywhere but its head. Still, I could feel its gaze pressing against me, heavy and unnatural, as if it were trying to drag my eyes up. Static crackled across my comms. At first I thought it was just interference, but then the noise sharpened into a faint whisper. "Why won't you look at me?" The voice was so soft, so familiar, that my throat tightened instantly. It was Jiro's voice. My heart clenched, and the urge to look surged like a riptide. Everything inside me begged for confirmation. Was he alive, trapped, reaching out for help? Or was the trench dangling his memory like bait on a hook? I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached, focusing on my oxygen gauge, my trembling hands anything but that voice. The whisper grew louder, cutting through the water until it filled my helmet. "Look at me. I'm right here. You left me." My stomach nodded. The words pierced deeper than any spear. They were the words I'd dreaded hearing ever since he vanished into the glow. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped my light. And still the figure hovered, patient, persistent, waiting for me to meet its eyes. It didn't move closer this time. It didn't need to. It knew I was unraveling where I floated. Suddenly my lamp flickered, then went out. Darkness swallowed everything, except the faint reflection of the figure. I clenched my eyelids shut, forcing myself blind. In that suffocating blackness, I could hear it moving closer, the slow swish of limbs cutting through the water, the faint hiss of air that wasn't mine. I wanted to scream, to thrash, but all I could do was float and count my breaths. 1, 2, 3. My teeth clicked against the regulator. Then right by my ear, Jiro's voice whispered again. "If you'd only looked at me, you'd know the truth." My light sputtered back on, and I saw nothing but empty water. The figure was gone, but the weight of its presence clung to me, sticky and unshakable. I bolted back toward the vessel, my kicks frantic, lungs straining. The rules don't mention what happens if you give in, whether you die instantly, lose your mind, or vanish like the others. All I knew was that I had danced on the edge of it, and barely pulled myself away. Back inside the hull, I ripped my helmet off, gasping as if the recycled air were salvation itself. The others stared at me, silent, waiting. I didn't tell them the details. Not about the voice, not about the beckoning hand. Some secrets gnaw deeper when shared. But the captain's eyes told me he knew. He'd seen them too, or something like them. His silence was confirmation enough. That night I lay awake, trembling with the memory of that whisper. My chest ached with guilt, even though I had followed the rule. The trench had found a new way to pry at our weakest points. It didn't just show us false shapes. It forced us to question our own loyalty, our own humanity. What would happen the next time, when exhaustion was heavier and my resolve thinner? Could I keep looking away forever? Because the rules didn't say these things came only once. And I knew, sooner or later, I would see the figure again, waiting, patient, with eyes that promised both answers and annihilation. I didn't sleep after that night with the false diver. Every sound inside the vessel seemed louder, every creak of the hull sharper, like the trench itself was pressing its weight against us. But exhaustion eventually wins, and I drifted into something shallow, half dream, half alert. That's when I first heard it, my own name, carried through the static of the comms. The voice was faint, stretched by distance and water, but unmistakable. It wasn't Jiro this time. It wasn't anyone from the crew. It was the trench itself, speaking with a cadence too perfect to ignore. And I remembered Rule 8, never answer, when the ocean calls your name. At first I thought it was some kind of interference, radio waves twisted by depth, but it wasn't random. It called again, softer, intimate, as though someone stood inches from my ear inside the helmet. The syllables lingered, tugging at memory, shaping themselves into something almost comforting. I lay frozen, staring at the ceiling above my bunk, my throat locked shut. If I so much as whispered back, if I even acknowledged it, the trench would know I was listening, and listening meant belonging. The next dive made everything worse. While we descended, the voice threaded through the comms once more. No one else seemed to react. The captain barked orders, my partner checked pressure, and yet the sound wove itself between us, hidden like a parasite. It said my name with such precision that for a terrifying second, I thought someone from the surface had joined us. But then the voice shifted, deepened, like an undertow pulling syllables apart. My fingers tightened on the console. Answering, even in panic, would be the same as opening a door I'd never close. I forced myself to focus on the readings. Oxygen, depth, hull integrity. Mundane numbers became lifelines. But the voice was patient, persistent. It began to add words, short phrases laced with temptation. Down here, waiting. See. My heart thudded faster, and every phrase coiled around me like chains. My body ached to speak. Just one word, any word, to break the suffocating silence pressing against my teeth. But I bit my tongue until I tasted iron. One of the newer crew members wasn't as strong. Her name was Yara. She was 23, too young to know the trench's cruelty, too eager to prove herself. During the dive, her breathing grew erratic. I heard her muttering under her breath, like she was answering questions no one else had asked. Then, clear as day, she said, "Yes, I hear you." The comms fell silent for a moment, too silent, as if the water itself had stopped moving. Then the screaming began. It wasn't a scream of pain, not at first. It was ecstasy, terror, longing. Every emotion ripped raw and bled together. We watched her monitor spike off the charts as she clawed at her helmet, trying to rip it free. The captain shouted her name, over and over, but she didn't hear. Her eyes rolled back, and bubbles surged from her regulator in a frenzy. Then suddenly, nothing, just stillness. Her body drifted, limp into the dark. We pulled her back, dragged her inside. But she wasn't gone, not in the way death usually works. Her eyes were wide open, pupils blown so large they swallowed the color. Her lips moved without sound, forming syllables that matched the voice we'd all been pretending not to hear. When we tried to restrain her, she thrashed with strength that shouldn't have belonged to someone her size. Then she stopped, collapsed, and her chest never rose again. The silence afterward was unbearable. No one spoke of it, no one dared, but the message was clear. The ocean hadn't just claimed her, it had recruited her. She had answered, and now she belonged to it. That night, lying awake again, the voice returned, stronger this time. It called my name not once but a dozen times, shifting tone each time, trying every inflection I'd ever heard. My mother's voice, my father's, Jiro's again, even my own, echoing back at me like a recording. Every version pleaded for acknowledgement. Every version begged me to surrender. I covered my ears with my hands, though it made no difference through the walls. The sound wasn't in the air, it was inside the water, inside me, reverberating through every cell. I bit down on my knuckles to keep from speaking, tasted blood, and still the urge clawed at me. Do you know how hard it is not to answer your own name? It feels like being erased, like refusing to exist. Morning came, if you can call it morning, when no sun reaches these depths. I stumbled through the motions, pale and shaking. The others looked the same, except for the captain. He watched me with eyes that knew. He didn't need to say it, but I realized then that every single one of us had heard the voice, and every single one of us was waiting to see who would be next. The ocean doesn't scream, it doesn't roar, it whispers, patient and eternal, wearing down your will the way waves grind stone into sand. You don't have to drown here for it to claim you. All it needs is one answer, one word, one acknowledgement that you hear it. Then you're no longer just inside the trench is inside you. And sometimes, when exhaustion drags me under, I wonder if silence is truly survival, or just a slower kind of surrender. The descent into the trench always feels like falling through a dream, but some nights, it feels more like sinking into someone else's memory. That's when the lights appear. At first they look like distant stars, flickering just beyond the glass, too far down to belong in this crushing dark. They shimmer in patterns that tug at your curiosity, glowing faintly like lanterns guiding a lost traveler. But they aren't lanterns, and they aren't safe. I learned this the hard way, and I'll never forget Rule 9. If you see lights in the trench, do not follow them. The first time I noticed them, I thought I was hallucinating. The monitors showed nothing. The sonar returned only empty silence. And yet just outside my viewport, faint pinpricks glowed like embers falling slowly through water. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but they stayed. One of them drifted closer, pulsing faintly, as though responding to my heartbeat. I knew I should turn away, shut my eyes, focus on the instruments, but something in me wanted to see what was hiding inside that glow. They're beautiful. That's the trap. Beauty in the trench doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the dark. The light swirled, almost playful, like a school of bioluminescent fish. I'd seen those before, but these were too deliberate. They moved with intent, shifting together as though controlled by a single mind. I leaned closer without realizing it, and the hum of the vessel seemed to quiet. The longer I stared, the less I could hear the others speaking through comms. Then I remembered Yara. I remembered her eyes after she answered the voice. I forced myself back, ripped my gaze away. My chest heaved, breath fogging the helmet glass. But some part of me still wanted to look again, like hunger gnawing at my spine. That's when the first scream came. It was from another diver, a man named Silas. He'd been behind me, slightly above, when the lights appeared. His voice tore through the comms, panicked and desperate. "Wait, don't leave me, there's a ship." His words stumbled out, tangled with disbelief. We tried to calm him, tried to reach him, but he kept insisting he saw something down there. A vessel glowing with lanterns, its deck lined with people waving for him. He swore he recognized their faces, people he'd lost long ago, before anyone could stop him. He kicked his thrusters and veered off course, chasing the lights as they wove deeper into the trench. His tether stretched taut, and the captain screamed for him to turn back. For a moment we thought he'd listen. His breathing slowed, his voice steadied, and then he cut the line. The silence afterward was unbearable. His beacon flickered across the monitors, growing smaller, swallowed by the abyss. The last thing we heard from him wasn't words. It was laughter, soft and broken, fading until the channel hissed empty. We never saw Silas again. The captain forced us back to base, but the lights weren't done with us. They followed. Every time the vessel creaked, every time the trench shifted, faint glows appeared at the edge of vision. None of the instruments registered them. They were for us alone. We began covering the viewports, one by one, but some of the crew couldn't resist peeking. They told themselves it was just a glance, just a second, until the second stretched too long. One engineer, Marlowe, swore he saw his daughter's face in the lights. She had died years ago. He claimed she was smiling at him, mouthing words he couldn't hear. He begged us to open the hatch, to let him outside so he could bring her home. We restrained him, but not before he slammed his head against the glass so hard it left a crack. After that, we kept him locked in his bunk, but even through the steel walls we could hear him whispering to the glow he thought was waiting outside. The trench doesn't attack in the ways you expect. It doesn't always send monsters or storms. Sometimes it just offers you something you can't resist. The illusion of reunion, the promise of light where there should be none. And the worst part is how real it looks. Not dreamlike, not hazy. Real, solid, undeniable. The kind of real that makes you question your own memory, your own grief. I've learned to keep my head down. I don't let my eyes wander to the edges of vision. I double-check the monitors, not the glass. But sometimes, when exhaustion drags me too close to sleep, I see the lights even behind my eyelids. They pulse faintly, inviting, patient, and I know they'll never stop waiting. The trench doesn't need to chase us. It doesn't need to pull us under by force. All it needs is for one of us to believe the lie and follow. And I'm terrified because every day it gets harder not to believe. The trench had grown heavier with every passing day, as if the water itself had learned to breathe with us, weigh us down, and test our resolve. After the lights claimed Silas and nearly Marlowe, every member of the crew avoided looking at anything outside the viewport, unless absolutely necessary. The walls of the sub vibrated with pressure, whispering a language older than humanity. I tried to focus on routine tasks, checking oxygen levels, scanning for anomalies, but each command felt futile against the oppressive silence of the abyss. And then came the whispers again, insidious and soft, reminding me of Rule 10, never trust the voices of the taken. At first it was subtle, just a murmur in the comms, almost indistinguishable from static interference. A soft hello, or a name called in a way that mimicked familiarity. But there was no mistake. The cadence, the accent, even the breath in the syllables were wrong. It was Jiro. It was Yara. It was Silas. All of them, and none of them. I could feel it crawling inside my chest, pressing against my ribs, reminding me how close death and mimicry lived in these depths. The crew pretended not to hear it, but every twitch, every glance toward the monitors, betrayed their growing fear. One engineer, Cade, began hearing conversations at odd times, answering back instinctively before thinking. "Yes, I'll follow," he whispered once, and we all froze, realizing the comms were dead. No one could hear him, and yet he continued speaking to shadows, his lips moving with frantic urgency. When we tried to pull him back, he struggled with a strength that shouldn't have been possible. His eyes darted around, wide with terror, as if 100 unseen divers surrounded him, whispering instructions, promising safety, mocking every hesitation. The voices became louder, more insistent with each passing hour. They mimicked distress calls, commands from the captain, even my own words from hours before. It was impossible to know what was real. We debated whether it was hallucination or some psychic manipulation inherent to the trench, but those explanations felt inadequate against the evidence. Crewmen who briefly responded vanished from monitoring cameras or were found drifting unconscious, tangled in their harnesses, their suits torn as if by invisible hands. I recall one moment vividly. The floodlight failed mid-dive, plunging us into pure darkness. Through the silence, I heard someone call my name in perfect imitation of my own voice. My heart froze. The voice knew my deepest fear, that I might betray the rules myself. "Come closer," it said, soft and coaxing. My hands clenched the console. The rational part of me screamed that it wasn't real, that it was mimicry and illusion, but the primal fear took over. I could feel my legs wanting to propel me toward the abyss, to find the source of that voice, to rescue who I thought needed me. Suddenly, a tug on my leg nearly knocked me into the viewport. It was Cade, thrashing, his fingers clawing at my suit as if to warn me, or perhaps to pull me down with him. "Don't listen, don't listen," he shouted, but his voice began to change mid-word, morphing into something unfamiliar, yet it carried the same cadence as the trench's whispers. It was alive in him now, a puppet of sound and shadow. I grabbed his arm and forced him down to the cabin floor, holding him with every ounce of strength I had. His eyes were rolling back, speaking in tongues I could not understand. We sealed him in the small medical bay, but the voices continued, echoing, taunting, calling our names at intervals. Each of us tried to ration our sanity by taking turns monitoring systems, avoiding any conversation outside necessary commands. But even then, the whispers found cracks in our defenses. Sometimes, when a crew member briefly glanced outside, a distorted reflection of someone lost would appear in the viewport, beckoning, smiling, urging compliance. And the deeper we went, the stronger the voices became, feeding off hope, loneliness, and the weakening resolve of those trapped in the vessel. Hours turned into a relentless stretch of psychological torment. Each creak, each ripple of water against the hull became a potential lure. One technician, Mara, began murmuring responses under her breath, arguing with voices no one else could hear. At first it was subtle, agreement, small concessions. Then she began issuing orders to an invisible crew outside, her body leaning toward the viewport, as though drawn by invisible threads. The rest of us watched helplessly. By the time we intervened, she was gone, pulled outside in a blink, leaving only a helmet floating in the water. Even the captain, stoic and composed in earlier missions, began showing cracks. One night he muttered a name, before slamming the console shut. "No, you're not real," stop speaking. But it didn't stop. The voices had learned him too. The tone, the pitch, the exact inflection of his command was mimicked, repeated, amplified until the entire vessel thrummed with its own treacherous orchestra. Sleep became impossible. Paranoia became our only companion. I realized then that the trench wasn't simply taking bodies. It was harvesting trust, collecting our obedience, training us to respond to false signals. Every mimic, every voice, was a test. And the price for failure wasn't immediate death, but something far worse, a hollowing, a permanent psychological tether to the trench. Crewmen who failed were gone in body, but their presence remained. Instruments, suits, even voices, all enlisted to lure others. I spent hours each day staring at the viewport, counting the seconds between whispers, trying to calibrate reality. Was that ripple a reflection, a trick of the dim light, or was it the trench, breathing, alive, mocking our hesitation? Every step, every word spoken aloud, carried the risk of betrayal. One slip, one soft acknowledgement, and the voice would claim you. I understood why the rule existed, carved into the mission brief, as if the authors had glimpsed the trench's sentience. Never trust the voices of the taken, because the taken don't speak to survive, they speak to deceive, and every syllable, every tone is calibrated to prey on weaknesses, hope, and familiarity. I still hear them sometimes, though they shouldn't exist, whispering through comms when the feed is dead, echoing in the hull when all is silent. The final lesson was clear. The trench isn't a passive void. It watches, adapts, and learns. It exploits grief, camaraderie, and desperation, crafting a symphony of lies to ensnare us. And I realized, with a hollow certainty, that even vigilance may fail. Even isolation may fail, because once you hear the voice and recognize the truth of it, you can never be entirely free from the trench's influence. By the time we reached the edge of the Mariana Trench, the vessel was barely holding together under the crushing pressure, both physical and psychological. Crew members had vanished, succumbed, or been taken by the voices, the lights, and the shadows that haunted the abyss. I had stopped counting how many days we had been trapped beneath that relentless darkness. Every dive, every flicker of light, every whisper had left a mark, and the trench seemed to know which wounds were invisible but lethal. And I knew then, with every fiber of terror in me, Rule 11, never surface alone with what you cannot see. The surface had become an equally dangerous place. Even though the sun reflected off the waves, giving the illusion of safety, I understood that what the trench had claimed would follow. Objects, silhouettes, or echoes of people who were gone, drifted alongside the vessel, hidden just beneath the water. One morning, I saw what looked like Silas's helmet bobbing in the waves, empty yet perfectly maintained, as if waiting for him to step out again. My hands shook, the sunlight betraying nothing of the horror below, and I clenched the railing, knowing better than to attempt any approach. The few remaining crew were silent, tense shadows of the people they had been. Each knew the rule intuitively, yet every glance toward the open water tempted them. When I spoke, my voice trembled. "Do not go outside alone," I warned, though no one dared respond. We all knew the trench had eyes, ears, and patience. The abyss had no rush. It could wait, and it always had. Even in the daylight, it could reach us through the depths, through the water, through memories of those it had taken. We tried to make surface repairs, patch the hull and ensure the vessel's integrity, but something always seemed off. Tools vanished, ropes shifted, instruments flickered with readings that made no sense. And sometimes just beneath the hull, I could feel something brushing against the steel. Not water currents, but shapes too deliberate to be natural. A shadow stretched unnaturally, curled and retreated, almost playful. The others ignored it, but I knew what we could not see might be waiting, patient and eternal. One night, while checking the exterior sensors, I saw a movement in the water, a dark form, just beneath the surface, following the vessel, not fast, not threatening, just moving, matching our speed. mirroring every turn. Its size was impossible to judge, its shape indistinct, yet I felt its intent, curiosity, hunger, and a terrible intelligence. I backed away immediately, heart hammering. It was too late for whoever it had claimed in the trench, but I could still obey the rule. I would not surface alone, not ever. The remaining crew took shifts at night, ensuring no one ventured out, yet isolation is a slow poison. Each of us knew that the trench's influence didn't end at the waterline. Whispers crept through radios, echoes of laughter, calls to follow, promises of reunion. Every morning, when the sun glanced off the waves, I half expected to see silhouettes walking on the deck, their eyes hollow, their lips moving in silence. The rule was simple, yet impossible to enforce completely. The unseen was everywhere. One incident nearly broke me. While assisting the captain with navigation, I glimpsed a shape on the horizon, a diver, floating motionless, perfectly still. My stomach dropped. Was it real, a reflection, or a mimic? My legs almost kicked toward it before I slammed my hands on the console. I couldn't know. I couldn't risk it. I remembered every rule, every warning, every ghostly lesson the trench had taught. Obedience was the only protection left. I backed away, turned my gaze toward the interior of the vessel, and forced myself to breathe. The vessel groaned in protest. Every creak, every shudder, echoed the trench's presence. Even now, as I write this, I can feel the weight of its patience pressing down. It's a presence that never sleeps. Every shadow under the hull, every shimmer on the water, is potentially a claim. I've watched men disappear on deck, men who thought they could step into safety, only to be pulled down, unseen, silent, erased. That is the true terror. What cannot be seen is relentless, and no surface, no vessel, no rules we carry can fully shield us from it. The final morning, the vessel rose slowly toward the sunlit waves. We were exhausted, hollowed by days beneath the abyss. The remaining crew moved with a mechanical precision, silent, eyes fixed on instruments, refusing any glance at the water. I did the same, my own pulse a metronome of terror. I thought of the voices, the lights, the beckoning shapes, and every soul the trench had claimed. I knew the final rule wasn't just about survival in the trench, it was survival afterward. What you cannot see might follow you home, patiently waiting for the moment you let your guard down. I write this now with trembling hands, because even though we surfaced, even though the sun warms my skin, I can feel it. The unseen presence, tethered to our minds and memories, ready to reappear when vigilance falters. Rule 11 isn't just about obeying the immediate danger. It is about the long shadow the trench casts over everything, the knowledge that once it knows your name, once it touches your senses, it will never truly let go. And I know with a certainty that chills me to my core, that the trench is still watching. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe for more.